The country entertainment program, Hee Haw, was once a beloved source of comfort and joy for millions of viewers. Yet behind the bright stage lights and the light-hearted jokes about cornfields and rural life lay real human stories marked by pain, loneliness, and a series of shocking and tragic deaths. 1. Roy Clark, 1933 to 2018. A smile that hid deep loneliness. Roy Clark was not just an entertainer. He was the soul and one of the brightest symbols of the legendary television program Hee Haw. With a banjo in his hands and a constant smile on his face, he brought joy to millions of viewers across the United States. Yet behind the dazzling stage lights lay a deeply scarred inner world, shaped by hardship and emotional wounds from the past. Born into extreme poverty during the Great Depression, young Roy was often mocked and ridiculed by his peers simply because of his passionate love for common country music. These childhood insecurities grew into a haunting emotional burden throughout his life. Roy Clark once painfully admitted that he turned to alcohol as a form of anesthesia, a way to silence the crushing loneliness that slowly consumed him. There were heartbreaking moments when, just as the stage curtain fell and thunderous applause still echoed through the hall, Roy would collapse backstage, unconscious in a wooden chair due to intoxication. He made the world laugh, yet found no cure for his own sorrow. In 2018, Roy Clark passed away at the age of 85 due to complications from pneumonia. He left behind an estimated fortune of $10 million and a vast musical legacy. However, the most tragic truth was not his passing, but the reality that, even at the height of his fame and admiration, very few people ever truly reached or understood the loneliness hidden behind his radiant smile. 2. Roni Stoneman, 1938 to 2024, the First Lady of the Banjo who slept in her car. Dubbed the First Lady of the Banjo, Roni Stoneman stood as a symbol of extraordinary talent and resilience. Yet behind the dazzling spotlight of a television star spanning more than 2 decades lay a long journey marked by tears and the harsh realities of poverty. Few could imagine that even after becoming a familiar name to millions of viewers, Roni still endured long nights curled up sleeping in her car by the roadside, unable to afford even the cheapest motel room during extended touring trips far from home. The roots of such hardship trace back to a difficult and unsettled childhood. As the 15th child in a family of 23 siblings, music was never a luxurious pastime or casual hobby for Roni. It was survival itself. From a very young age, she was already embracing a banjo larger than her own body, practicing relentlessly until her small hands became raw and calloused, even bleeding at times. That music was not merely for performance. It was the sole means through which her family could afford rent and put food on the table. Roni Stoneman passed away in early 2024 at the age of 85, closing a remarkable career of more than 6 decades in the entertainment industry. Despite a lifetime devoted to music, the estimated $1 million she left behind stands as a bittersweet reflection of the inequalities within the entertainment world of her era. It exposes the reality that female artists, no matter how exceptional their talent, were often undervalued and paid far less than their male counterparts. She departed this life leaving behind a legacy of joy-filled music, while carrying, until her final days, the quiet burdens of financial struggle and sacrifice. 3. Buck Owens, 1929 to 2006, the king who lost his soul on the highway. In the world of country music, Buck Owens was a king without a crown, the co-host who helped lead Hee Haw to the peak of its popularity. Yet behind that illustrious career lay a heart wound that never truly healed. Everything in Buck's world seemed to collapse on a fateful day in 1974 when his closest friend, creative partner, and brilliant guitarist Don Rich died in a tragic motorcycle accident. From that moment on, people said Buck Owens still stood on stage, but the music inside him had forever remained on that fatal stretch of highway. The tragedy of losing his soulmate completely transformed Buck as a person. From a charismatic entertainer, he became irritable, isolated, and extremely harsh with those around him. He threw himself into business as a form of escape, building a powerful financial empire with an estimated fortune of up to 100 million US dollars. However, no matter how much wealth and influence he accumulated, Buck Owens remained a ghost within his own life. The bright spotlight around him could not warm a heart that had grown cold and empty since Don Rich's passing. His final departure carried the tone of a devoted legend until his last breath. In 2006, after finishing a performance at his own Crystal Palace venue, Buck Owens suffered a sudden heart attack and passed away. He died just as the stage lights went out, as if offering a final farewell to his audience. The king of the Bakersfield Sound lay down, closing a long journey filled with glory, but also with a lingering pain that never faded after losing the friend who left him far too soon. 4. String Bean, 1915 to 1973. The shocking murder over hidden cash. Among the cast of Hee Haw, David String Bean Aikman stood out like a figure from a folk tale, with his tall, lanky frame and eccentric stage outfits. Behind his somewhat naive appearance and gentle personality, String Bean was a man rooted in old-world values. Having grown up during times of economic instability, he developed a deep mistrust of the banking system. Instead of entrusting his earnings to financial institutions, he chose to store all of his cash, carefully hiding it inside the wooden walls of his modest home in Tennessee. That cautious habit unintentionally paved the way for a tragic catastrophe in 1973. Rumors of a hidden treasure began to spread, attracting two criminals who broke into his property. When String Bean and his wife returned home after a performance, they were brutally ambushed and murdered at their doorstep. The most heartbreaking irony of the case was that the attackers searched every corner of the house, only to leave empty-handed. They never found the money, leaving behind a scene of senseless and devastating loss. Decades later, the wooden house slowly fell into obscurity until a renovation project was undertaken. It was then that the truth finally came to light. Stacks of decayed, dust-covered cash were discovered still hidden deep inside the walls. String Bean and his wife had lost their lives in vain for a treasure that their killers never actually reached. His story is not only a dark and tragic chapter in country music history, but also a painful reminder of how fragile human life can be in the face of blind greed. 5. Merle Haggard, 1937 to 2016. The oxygen tank hidden beneath his shirt. Merle Haggard was not just a musician. He was the living definition of country music itself, a weathered, rough-edged soul, yet profoundly honest and deeply human. Before becoming a legend admired by millions, his life was marked by a long trail of missteps and incarceration at San Quentin prison. It was within those cold prison bars, and through the weight of late remorse, that his deeply reflective and emotionally raw musical voice was forged. Merle did not sing about the pain of others. He sang about the scars he carried throughout his own life. The resilience of this outlaw figure became most evident in his final years, when he faced a devastating battle with lung cancer. Even as his breathing grew labored and his strength steadily declined, Merle Haggard refused to step away from the stage. During his final tours, audiences still saw a legendary performer standing tall and singing with pride, but few realized that beneath his loose-fitting jacket was a hidden oxygen tank. He fought death minute by minute, borrowing each artificial breath so he could deliver his heartfelt songs to his fans. For Merle, dying on stage was the most dignified and triumphant form of farewell. Fate ultimately granted him a deeply symbolic ending. Merle Haggard passed away on his 79th birthday in 2016. The circle of his life closed exactly where it began. He departed, leaving an irreplaceable void in the hearts of his fans. Yet the image of an aging, fragile man performing with an oxygen tank concealed beneath his shirt remains an eternal symbol of artistic pride and unwavering devotion to music until his very last breath. 6. Tammy Wynette, 1942 to 1998, the name that disappeared from her gravestone. Tammy Wynette was hailed as the First Lady of country music, a voice capable of breaking hearts with the timeless anthem, Stand By Your Man. Yet her real life unfolded like a sorrowful ballad filled with compounding tragedies. Behind the glittering spotlight stood a woman who endured 5 failed marriages, more than 30 major surgeries, and a relentless struggle with prescription painkiller addiction. She spent her entire life singing about devotion and love, yet ironically, she herself was constantly searching for a stable emotional home. The most heartbreaking tragedy did not end with her passing in 1998. It continued even at her final resting place. After her death, fans and the public were outraged to discover that on her tomb at the Woodlawn Cross Mausoleum, the legendary name, Tammy Wynette, had completely disappeared. Instead, the gravestone bore the name Virginia W. Richardson, taken from her last husband's surname. A woman who had spent her entire youth building an iconic musical legacy under her own name was, in the end, stripped of her identity and reduced to the shadow of a man on a cold slab of stone. The incident sparked a wave of outrage from her family and fans around the world, who saw it as a profound disrespect to the legacy she had created. After years of determined legal battles and emotional disputes, her rightful name was finally restored. Today, the inscription, Tammy Wynette, once again stands proudly on her gravestone, serving as a belated affirmation that no matter how life may have attempted to erase her, the spirit of the First Lady will forever belong to music and to the public who loved her. 7. Lulu Roman, 1946 to 2025, the orphan who finally found a family. Among the many lives featured on Hee Haw, the story of Lulu Roman stands out like a song of hope, touching the deepest corners of human compassion. Her life began in painful abandonment. Lulu grew up behind the cold walls of an orphanage, spending 18 long years there. During that time, while other children were gradually adopted into loving families, Lulu was repeatedly overlooked simply because of her larger physical appearance. Society's cruel rejection at such a young age planted deep insecurities within her and left an emotional void that seemed impossible to fill. That profound loneliness eventually led her into years of misdirection, turning to drugs as an escape from a harsh reality. Yet at what seemed like her lowest point, Lulu Roman found a form of salvation through religious faith. And an even greater miracle followed when she joined Hee Haw. There, the cast and crew did not look at her with judgment. Instead, they welcomed her with genuine warmth and acceptance. For Lulu, her colleagues were not just co-workers. They became her first real family, the home she had longed for throughout most of her life. She passed away in 2025 at her son's home, surrounded by love and absolute peace. Her departure was not marked by tragedy, but rather felt like a gentle, fulfilled closing note to a life that had overcome its hardships. From an abandoned child, she grew into a beloved performer adored by millions, finding inner peace and proving to the world that no matter how dark one's beginnings may be, love and faith can still rewrite life into a radiant ending. Final summary: the radiant spotlight and the quiet shadows behind the curtain. The television program Hee Haw has gone down in broadcasting history as a symbol of joy, rural charm, and infectious laughter that connected an entire generation of viewers. Yet when the stage lights faded and the applause became a distant memory, a harsh truth emerged. The price of bringing happiness to millions is often profound loneliness and deep, unhealed pain. These performers, masters of masking emotion, used the very scars of their own lives as fuel for their art. Looking back at their journeys, we see a Roy Clark hiding solitude behind a radiant smile, a Ronnie Stoneman fiercely playing the banjo with bleeding hands, and a Buck Owens lost within a multi-million-dollar empire after the death of his closest friend. Each story stands as a painful reminder that fame's brilliance can sometimes be nothing more than a veil concealing personal tragedy, from poverty and addiction to shocking acts of violence. They devoted their lives like silkworms spinning their final threads, leaving behind immortal melodies and priceless laughter, while silently carrying emotional voids that no wealth or recognition could ever fill. These hidden struggles do not diminish their legacy. Rather, they deepen our appreciation for the human beings behind the legends. They remind us that behind every entertainer is a fragile heart, a turbulent fate, and a longing to be truly understood. As we revisit the sorrowful histories of the Hee Haw cast, we do not merely bow before their talent. We learn to love and empathize more deeply with those who chose to burn themselves brightly in order to warm the world.